If war starts, it will be catastrophic for the global economy because immediately the Red Sea will be shut down, and these countries in the Persian Gulf, they don't stand a chance.
What we're really talking about, if he goes back to war the way he did before with our forces, is Armageddon. And the idea that the man with his finger on the button for Armageddon is not really Trump, but Bibi Netanyahu, is even more disturbing.
The last 5% or the last bits are frozen, from my understanding. They've been frozen for a few days now. Then we had this assault.
Trump has sold 17.8 million barrels this last week from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve at a price below market rates. This manipulation at its current rate will drain our Strategic Petroleum Reserve in roughly 60 days.
The Iranians have the most important piece of leverage, and that is the Strait of Hormuz. And if the American side does not abide by its commitments, then the strait is closed. That's why Iran got such a good deal.
Tuesday, May 26, 2026. Two conversations, same day, opposite sides of the world. One inside Iran and one inside the American military community. And they're describing the same catastrophe from the inside out. What you're about to see is the Iranian side and the US military side looking at the same exact crisis, at the same exact moment.
It was actually the night before, the day before yesterday at night. The Americans bombed two naval vessels, small naval vessels. I think two were on each, and they murdered 4 soldiers, 4 guards. And it was unprovoked, and they were in Iranian territorial water, and there's no excuse.
And here's what a decorated American combat veteran and former advisor to the Secretary of Defense said about those same strikes that same morning.
I think we just have to wait until this war breaks into the open, and I think we're getting closer. And with this event of last night, it seems almost certain that we're going to go back to a hot war.
Same strikes, same morning. Iranian side says murder. American military analyst says hot war coming. Let's take a look at the board. The strikes first, because everything else only makes sense once you see the full picture of May 25th.
It was actually the night before, the day before yesterday at night. The Americans bombed 2 naval vessels, small naval vessels. I think 2 were on each, and they murdered 4 soldiers, 4 guards. And it was unprovoked, and they were in Iranian territorial water, and there's no excuse. They were implying, I think, that they had something to do with mines, but they were not even in a place which had anything to do with which would have any need for mines. It was Iranian territorial water. So it's very strange, and we're seeing very different messages from the United States. The Iranians responded. They fired missiles, and also I think there was a ship struck hours ago alongside the coast of Oman outside of the Persian Gulf, possibly a response to the U.S. aggression.
CENTCOM confirmed those strikes. Spokesman Captain Tim Hawkins said, U.S. forces conducted self-defense strikes in southern Iran today to protect our troops from threats posed by Iranian forces. Targets including missile launch sites and Iranian boats attempting to emplace mines. Iran's IRGC response came May 26. MQ-9 Reaper drone shot down, confirmed by Jerusalem Post and Reuters. F-35 and RQ-4 surveillance drone also fired upon. Iran's response wasn't just military. Their embassy in India issued a formal statement calling the strikes perpetration of aggressive actions concurrent with ongoing diplomatic process mediated by Pakistan, and warning that the IRGC will leave no act of aggression unanswered. This is the Macgregor read on what Trump thinks he's doing here.
I think Donald Trump is caught up in what he thinks are useful tactics designed to induce compliance with what he wants Iran to do. I know that sounds ridiculous, but if you go back to his book, The Art of the Deal, and you page through it, there are lots of discussions of tactics that range from coddling to bullying your opponent on the other side of the table. And you've always got to go back to Roy Cohn's rules, which is you must remain on the attack at all times. I think if you look at that broader picture, what he's written in his book, The Art of the Deal, and his Roy Cohn, rules for life, it begins to make sense if you're Donald Trump. Now, for the rest of us, it makes no sense at all. This is not a real estate deal. This is life and death now for essentially, potentially, hundreds of millions of people all over the globe. We're staring at the potential for famine and a whole range of really catastrophic developments in the global economy. So, whatever he thinks he's doing, it isn't working. He's actually making matters much worse. He's making it much harder to come to any sort of agreement.
Art of the deal tactics applied to a conflict where the economic consequences are felt at every gas pump in America. That is where we are on May 26. Two sources, opposite sides, same conclusion. This is going in the wrong direction, and the deal that was almost done had gotten very close. Welcome back to ARM Geopolitics. I'm Aaron Johnson. On this channel, we don't just cover the news, we cut through the noise, dominate the narrative, and give you the analysis mainstream media is too scared to run. Vigilance is our shield, truth is our weapon. Let's get into it. The deal. What was actually on the table and the pattern that keeps killing it?
We are getting mixed messages from the United States. On the one hand, we saw all those messages. First, we had flexibility from the Americans, and the deal, in my opinion, is a good deal for Iran. And then there was a lot of pushback in the United States, and then Trump began to make all these crazy tweets that if he was serious, that would mean that the deal was completely undermined. But from my understanding, at the negotiating table, his tweets had nothing to do, or his social media posts had nothing to do with what was going on at the negotiating table. But the last 5% or the last bits are frozen, from my understanding. They've been frozen for a few days now. Then we had this assault, and it's unclear why the United States is trying to, first of all, they murdered 4 people. 4 families have lost their young sons, and it's unclear why they're doing this, why they did this. And then we had, of course, the Israeli regime again saying that they're going to carpet bomb Beirut and bring down all the apartment blocks. And you would think there would be, of course, outrage in the West, but the West has really exposed itself. There's human rights and all that, the nonsense that the facade that we would hear about for decades, or that we would see for decades, it's all gone. But Netanyahu wants to expand the war in Lebanon, to carry out airstrikes on civilian targets at a much greater, much more extensively, in order to wreck the ceasefire.
This is the same pattern as the first ceasefire. Marandi explains exactly how that one broke down.
Remind us all of what happened during the first ceasefire. After the fighting, and when right before the Islamabad talks, there was an agreement so that ships that were linked to those countries that were helping the United States against Iran, the Saudis, the Emiratis, Qatar, Bahrain, and the UAE, they would be able to leave. But one of the conditions was a regional ceasefire, including Lebanon. And so as soon as that ceasefire agreement was declared, Netanyahu began carpet bombing cities in Beirut. He killed hundreds of people in 10 minutes. I mean, it's amazing what, just talking about these things and how the West just lets it happen and Western journalists are quiet. It's just unbelievable how the narrative in the West what it used to be like and what it is now when it comes to the Israeli regime. But in any case, he wrecked the ceasefire back then. If he had halted the fighting, then we wouldn't be in this global economic crisis that we're in today, because the shipping through the Strait of Hormuz would have increased. back then. That's like a month and a half ago, more than a month and a half ago. So right now, it seems like he wants to do the same thing.
This is Macgregor on why Netanyahu has no incentive to stop.
I think the Iranians have reached that conclusion. First of all, I think they know that ultimately Mr. Netanyahu has veto power over everything. In other words, even if their intermediaries talking to the Pakistanis were to sign up for something, and we might initially regard it as acceptable, they know that Netanyahu can intervene quickly and say, no, that's unacceptable, and we're back to square one. Netanyahu right now and his government really has no incentive to cooperate with us to forge any kind of useful peace agreement in the Persian Gulf. They just don't. As far as they're concerned, it is in their interest to keep us engaged in destroying Iran. And until Iran is destroyed, this war is not going to end.
Now, the specific details of what Iran's delegation is actually doing in Qatar right now, because this is more concrete than anything in the press releases.
Speaker of Parliament went to Qatar to make sure that, as a part of this agreement, that the transfer of, I think, about $12 billion to Iran from Qatar takes place, actually happens, because we've had the last time Qatar, our money, if you recall, I'm sure you recall, it was when it was stuck in Korea, South Korea. Then they transferred it to Qatar, and then they wouldn't transfer it to Iran. The Americans were dishonest. The Biden government, they were dishonest, and they wouldn't let that money through, even though there was an agreement. They used shortcomings in their agreement, loopholes to prevent Iran from using it. So this time round, the Iranian delegation is in Qatar to make sure there's no loophole, and as soon as there's an agreement, if there is an agreement, that money is swiftly transferred to Iran.
This is verified and specific. The National, on May 26, confirmed the Iranian delegation in Qatar includes Parliament Speaker Ghalibaf, Foreign Minister Araghchi, and Central Bank Governor Hamadi. The presence of the central bank governor sends one clear signal. The core issue is liquidity transfer. Iran wants $12 billion immediately on signing, another $12 billion within 60 days, $24 billion total. The $12 billion in Qatar traces back to 2023. Iranian oil revenues frozen after the US left the JCPOA moved from South Korea to Qatari institutions, then blocked by the Biden administration. Iran has been waiting for that money for years. This time they're not signing anything until the transfer mechanism is guaranteed, not promised. Guaranteed. The economic numbers, because this is what makes the 60-day timeline a deadline, not a preference.
In April, U.S. inflation increased from up to 3.8% from 3.2%. Right now, this war is leading to inflation projections for the second quarter of roughly 6%. Now, if that's true, and I think it probably is, that means our interest rates should be at about 7%. But that would be catastrophic for us, and so they're being artificially suppressed and held at about 3.75%. When we first started this war, we ended up taking 13 million barrels of oil off the market every day. If we restart the war against Iran, that is, we go back in and start hammering Iran from the air and from the sea with all the missiles and bombs that we can accumulate, Iran says it will counterattack and remove an estimated 25 million barrels out of the global market.
Macgregor's numbers need some precision. Here are the verified figures. CPI hit 3.3% in March 2026, the highest since May 2024. The Dallas Fed projects inflation remains elevated through the third quarter. OECD warned inflation could reach 4.2% if the war drags on. Fed funds rate held at 3.5 to 3.75%, confirmed, being held steady despite inflationary pressure. On the SPR, 247wallstreet.com confirmed the SPR posted its largest ever single week drawdown, roughly 10 million barrels in mid-May, leaving the reserve under 375 million barrels. National Security Journal confirmed it. now it has fallen below 300 million barrels after the spring release of 53.3 million barrels. Macgregor's directional argument is confirmed by every independent source. The mathematical timeline, end of July. This is where both Macgregor and Marandi independently converge.
We have 374 million barrels in our strategic petroleum reserve. Right now, we know that President Trump has sold 17.8 million barrels this last week from the strategic petroleum reserve at a price below market rates. That means lower oil prices below $110 per barrel. Now, what's this done? Well, this has helped him to manipulate the oil market in a way that insulates U.S. users of fuel from the real impact of the Iran war. This manipulation at its current rate will drain our strategic petroleum reserve in roughly 60 days. So let's do the math. That means by the end of July, we're staring at an empty strategic petroleum reserve. Now then, let's turn to China. China is 86% self-sufficient in oil, but it still has a 14% shortfall. Those shortfalls are being made up by various countries, including Saudi Arabia, mostly Russia, and some others. So they're not in a dangerous position whatsoever. They've stockpiled oil. They have the largest petroleum reserve in the world, 1.3 billion barrels in above ground storage. That means they could all be extracted. In 2022, at the start of the Ukraine war, 3 million barrels were taken off the global economy per day. This drove the oil price at that point initially up to $120 per barrel. Today, right now, the United Kingdom and our European allies are providing drone components and targeting data to the Ukrainians so that they can attack refineries and other oil infrastructure inside Russia. This has been successful insofar as it has reduced the numbers of millions of barrels per day by 13 million from the global supply. At this rate, what are the long-term implications? We're going to watch the global economy shrink by an estimated 36%. Now, just for referential purposes, the Great Depression reduced the world economy by 20%. However, the effects of the Great Depression were mitigated by much lower debt to GDP ratios that currently prevail in the United States and Europe. What happens if we lose, say, an estimated 30% of global productivity? Well, this is effectively a global depression. We're going to be part of that.
The Great Depression at minus 20%. Macgregor's Iran plus Ukraine scenario at minus 36%. And the US strategic reserve running out by the end of July. That's the economic picture behind every tweet, every press conference, every leaked document about the deal. Marandi said it plainly. The Iranians can outwait. The Americans cannot. And every day, the clock runs down a little further. Now, the military picture, because Petraeus is calling for going back in, and both of our guests had very different but equally devastating responses to that proposal.
The Iranians are far more prepared for war today than they were 3 months ago. Economically speaking, as we discussed last time, yes, things are more difficult, obviously. But militarily speaking, Iran is much stronger than it was 3 months ago, significantly stronger. And Iran's allies across the region are more prepared, especially Yemen. So if war starts, it will be catastrophic for the global economy because immediately the Red Sea will be shut down. Immediately, the Iranians will, as soon as the Americans strike, they're going to strike back. And these countries in the Persian Gulf, they don't stand a chance. And of course, the Israelis will be hammered day and night. So I think Trump doesn't want war. I think he's afraid of war. And the fact that he gave significant concessions in this agreement is an indication of that.
Petraeus' specific proposal from Macgregor's perspective.
Well, let's reflect for a minute on what David Petraeus thinks is war. To him, war at this point is simply high-altitude bombing and missile strikes from the sea, from the air. That's all. He doesn't seem to understand what he's actually describing. This is not Iraq. This is not Afghanistan. This is Iran. This is a huge country. It has a real civilization. It's a real nation state. It's not a collection of Arab tribes that were herded together as a result of the Sykes-Picot Agreement. This is not in any way, shape, or form artificial. This is real. He's talking about going to war. If you're going to go to war with Iran, you're going to have to mobilize the United States. This is not a minor affair. People forget that Germany in 1942 had roughly 80 million people. We're talking about an Iranian population of 93 million right now. And they obviously have access to extraordinarily advanced technology in a whole range of areas, as well as to overhead satellite arrays in space. And he's talking in a cavalier way about, well, I guess we'll just have to go to war to make our point. Now, I'm sure the people that have him on their payroll at KKR, all of whom are ardent Zionists and part of the larger Israeli Jewish financial network, will reward him for his statements. But this is extremely irresponsible. The United States has no interest whatsoever that would justify this kind of action. None.
Marandi from inside Iran. Significantly stronger, Yemen ready, Red Sea shuts immediately. Macgregor from inside the US military framework. Going to war with Iran for real means mobilizing the United States. And the country that would be asked to fight it has no interest that justifies it. The hawks saying, go back in, are describing a bombing campaign. Macgregor is describing what a war with Iran actually requires. Those two things are not the same.
What we're really talking about, if he goes back to war the way he did before with our forces, is Armageddon. And the idea that the man with his finger on the button for Armageddon is not really Trump, but Bibi Netanyahu, is even more disturbing.
Now, the structural reason this deal, if it ever gets signed, will be fundamentally different from every US-Iran agreement that came before it.
At the end of the day, Iran has learned a lot from the nuclear deal, the JCPOA. In the JCPOA, which I was involved with the JCPOA negotiations. I was in Vienna when it was signed. I was like the media advisor to the foreign minister, Dr. Zarif, back then. And the mistake that we made, the Iranians, meaning I wasn't a negotiator, but was that we, in the agreement, we had certain commitments, and the Americans had some commitments. And the Iranians carried out their commitments, and then the Americans wouldn't carry out theirs. And the Iranians were chasing after the Americans until the end of Obama's term in office, and the Americans just wouldn't implement the deal. So it turned out not to be a good deal for those reasons. If the Americans had actually been faithful and honest to the agreement, it would have been a decent deal. But we made the mistake of allowing them to have these loopholes and to take advantage of us. So this time around, the Iranians are not willing to do that. So at the very start, they have to receive that money, and that's why they're in Qatar, to make sure that this goes through immediately. There are no hiccups. But at the end of the day, the Iranians have the most important piece of leverage, and that is the Strait of Hormuz. And if the American side does not abide by its commitments, then the strait is closed. That's why Iran got such a good deal. In the war, they had the upper hand, and as a result, they were also able to maintain control over the Strait of Hormuz. And the U.S. siege is a double-edged sword. It's hurting the Iranian economy, but it's devastating the global economy and, of course, the economies of these five Arab regimes in the Persian Gulf too. So the Iranians have, this time around, they're not going to carry out their side of the bargain and then wait for this other side to do so, because Obama didn't, and Trump is definitely worse than Obama.
Marandi was at the JCPOA negotiations in Vienna. He was the media advisor to Foreign Minister Zarif when it was signed. He is describing the loopholes from the inside, not as analysis, but as lived experience. The $6 billion South Korea story he references, verified. Iranian oil revenues frozen after the US left the JCPOA, moved to Qatari institutions in 2023 as part of a prisoner swap, then blocked by the Biden administration using implementation restrictions. That money is now at the center of the Qatar talks. The central bank governor being in the delegation isn't symbolic, it's operational. They're working out the transfer mechanics before the ink dries, not after.
The Americans are in a rush. They have been. And then suddenly, as I said, we almost reached the finish line. And then you had the Zionists start screaming and yelling and expressing outrage and turning against Trump. And Trump seemed to get cold feet.
Donald Trump is incoherent. Let's be frank. There is no coherent framework that he sticks to. And he tends to mix various elements of an agreement at different points in time, which explains your, comment about the nuclear dust. The interesting thing is that Rubio ultimately Rubio's more articulate. What he says sounds more plausible, but at the end, it's the same outcome. Either we're going to get what we want or there will be no deal, is effectively what he's saying. And no deal is better than a bad deal, or so he thinks. What is a bad deal? Anything that leaves Iran intact. And what are the principal stumbling blocks? It's obviously this enriched uranium business that moves back into the center of the discussion routinely. And in addition to that Iran cannot retain control of the Strait of Hormuz. Well, those are two insoluble problems from the standpoint of Iran. Iran sees both of those as inextricably intertwined with their national sovereignty and independence. So I think we can say with some certainty there's not going to be a deal. Forget it.
The gap between Macgregor and Marandi's assessments is revealing. Macgregor reads the stated US positions, uranium out, no Hormuz fees, and says insoluble, no deal. Marandi reads what's actually happening at the table and says the deal was almost done. The difference, Macgregor is describing the official position. Marandi is describing the negotiating room. The question is which one Trump's team is actually operating from. And the answer, based on the tweets about nuclear dust and the strikes on boats the same week as the Qatar delegation, is apparently both simultaneously. And finally, both experts, both sources ask the same bottom line question. What happens from here?
But if the Americans go back to war, they're going to lose the war. If they continue with siege warfare, the global economy is going to collapse. The Iranian economy will go downhill, but the Iranians will manage. They will wait till the other side gives up. This is, as I've said many times, this is an existential war for Iran. This is not a war of choice. But for the United States, it's going to be increasingly problematic continuing this policy as the ship sinks, because people are saying, why are we doing this? Why are we is it all for Israel? Is it all for Zionism? Does India have to go down because of Zionism? Does Australia, does Niger, does Brazil, do all these countries have to suffer because of Zionism? Do the American people have to suffer because of Zionism, because of Netanyahu? So that is going to make it much more difficult for the United States.
Donald Trump, who made this observation back before he was even elected the first time. And he said, if our presidents would have just gone to the beach and enjoyed the sun and the beach, we would have been much better off in the Middle East. Now stop and think about that. In other words, his attitude was, when he was ultimately became the nominee of the Republican Party in 2016, it was, well, if we had done nothing, Dan, just gone to the beach and enjoyed the ocean and the sun, we'd be much better off in the Middle East today. Well, somebody needs to read that to him again, because that's even more true now than it was then. The damage we did to ourselves and to the world at that point, I wouldn't say it was marginal, but it was recoverable. What we've done to ourselves now in the Persian Gulf, when it was absolutely not necessary to do so, is beyond evaluation. It is global in its impact. as far as the Persian Gulf is concerned, since we're not going to invade Iran to ensure that Iran becomes whatever Israel wants it to be, it's time to come to Jesus, not Netanyahu, and end the war.
Two experts, opposite positions in the conflict, same conclusion. The war serves no American interest. Marandi says it explicitly. Does America have to suffer because of Netanyahu? Macgregor says it with a quote from Trump's own mouth. Before he was president, Trump had the answer. Go to the beach. That answer has not changed. The situation has only gotten worse. And the clock, in the form of a strategic petroleum reserve running towards empty in an economy approaching the kind of inflation math that makes midterms dangerous, is now ticking louder than the rhetoric. We have officially hit a point where the facade of total control is completely breaking down. In a single day, two of the sharpest minds on opposite sides of this war just dropped the same exact warning. The chessboard is locked in a deadly stalemate, and the risk of a global explosion has never been higher. Marandi is exposing the view from inside Iran, revealing just how close we came to peace before the establishment sabotaged it. The treaty was 95% done until US forces targeted Iranian sailors in their own waters, and Israel threatened a massive escalation in Lebanon. Tehran is done playing games with vague diplomatic promises. They are locking down every single loophole because Washington has proven it cannot be trusted to keep its word. At the same exact time, Macgregor is exposing the terrifying math behind the American war machine. Our oil reserves are flashing red, sitting below 375 million barrels. If the sparks hits the gunpowder and Iran closes off the Red Sea, the combination of a Middle Eastern blockade and disrupted Russian energy networks will send the global economy into a tailspin worse than the Great Depression. Regular families will bear the brunt of a crisis that could have been avoided entirely if Washington had just stayed out of it. The most dangerous player on the board isn't sitting in Tehran or Washington. It is a foreign leader who is completely insulated from American voters, actively sabotaging ceasefires and dictating US military policy in the Gulf. Trump is trapped in a corner of his own making, caught between the ghost of his own past, anti-interventionist rhetoric, and the relentless pressure of a neocon establishment that refuses to let him leave. The mask is off, the options are gone, and the countdown has already begun. We are officially looking at an economic time bomb, and it forces us to ask a question that politicians in Washington are completely terrified to answer. The math doesn't lie. Between a depleted oil reserve, skyrocketing inflation, and major political exposure at home, the US war machine is cornered. Iran knows they hold leverage. They know they can wait us out. And the clock is ticking down to a massive summer crisis. So let's talk about the one blueprint the corporate networks won't touch. How do we actually exit this trap? What is the real-world strategy that protects American household budgets, reopens the global shipping routes, and strips foreign entanglements of their veto power over our economy? I want to see your specific blueprints in the comment section below, because the establishment has completely run out of answers. If you are sick of this mainstream media hiding the true cost of these foreign policy blunders, help us smash past the algorithm and share this video around. A community like this only beats the feed noise when you guys push the truth out. Let me know your thoughts below, and let's get the debate started. This is ARM Geopolitics. I'm Aaron Johnson. Stay sharp, stay informed, and never stop questioning. I'll see you in the next one.